Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, where we use games as thought experiments to discuss topics like situational ethics, moral decision making, and how we can improve our lives and the world around us. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're finishing our dive into Telltale Games Batman by asking how the events that rocked Gotham could have been prevented. As we begin the final episode of Telltale's Batman, titled City of Light, we get our first glimpse at an issue that's become prevalent in the past century as our world has become more dependent on technology to get by. As Batman is trying to save a group of hostages that includes the police commissioner, he runs into issues with his suit and grapple as the children of Arkham have set up what I can only assume is some kind of EMP device that knocks out his Batvision before his grapple hook malfunctions as he's trying to grapple over to save the police commissioner. Luckily, Bruce has his martial arts training to fall back on here, but his reliance on these tools and tech is an Achilles heel. If this weren't a story about a superhero, he would most likely be dead in the water, metaphorically and perhaps even literally, as the children of Arkham are using a lot of his own tech against him. And honestly, this is a good moment to bring up technology, and specifically AI in our own world, because more and more it's becoming a crutch for people to lean on, both creatively and professionally. Why learn to paint, write, or do much of anything else when all you have to do is type a prompt into a machine and have it spit out a picture, a novel, or a quarterly report? But, like the issue that Bruce has when he's hit with an EMP, when that technology goes away for one reason or another, the people who were reliant on it are hindered and unable to keep doing whatever they had been using it for. Technology has helped us out in a myriad of ways throughout the course of human history. From the invention of the wheel to the very first computers and even into the modern era. It's made life easier and allowed us to achieve heights that were only once dreamed of in the wildest of imaginations. That being said, at the end of the day, everything we use, from a calculator to a supercomputer, is just a tool, and we should be careful with how we wield these amazing devices. As I write this, companies all over the world have been racing to use every drop of water and ounce of electricity to create bigger and bigger language models, convinced they are just moments away at any given time from creating some kind of magical being that will solve all of humanity's problems. If it isn't companies, it's individuals who would rather spend their time typing prompts into systems to create images or stories than learning how to paint or write themselves. While it's understandable to want to make things easier, it's also a trap that could easily bring us down if we aren't careful. When you become too dependent on the technology, you risk losing everything when that tech goes away. A good example comes if you watch what happens when the internet goes down for one reason or another, or when the power goes out. Some people might just reach for a good book or go for a walk. Many people panic and have trouble figuring out what to do though. You can see something similar at the grocery store when computers go down and they can't accept cards or have trouble counting change. It's important to know the basics and not to rely on tech for anything more than a time saver, and to get outside from time to time to enjoy the sun. If we all just stepped away from our computers occasionally and took the time to really learn hobbies like painting or writing, the world would be a better place overall. Thankfully, there is more to Batman than his tech and gear, and after facing down a few goons and one of his own drones, Bruce decides to take the wheel as Cobblepot heads back to his namesake park with some hostages to wait on Batman's appearance. Gordon isn't thrilled about the idea of letting Bruce Wayne walk into what is definitely a trap, with police surrounding the park as Cobblepot stands in the middle of it. But he doesn't have a lot of options for handling the situation. The whole interaction is an interesting one, as the two old friends come face to face again. Cobblepot's family had everything taken away from them thanks to Bruce's parents, and his anger can't really be brushed off even if his actions are extreme. The sad reality is that everything that happens in the course of the game, specifically the actions of the children of Arkham, Cobblepot, and Lady Arkham, falls squarely on the shoulders of the Wayne family and Thomas Wayne's willingness to use his position of power to gain more wealth and power within the city of Gotham. The kind of hurt that he caused, alongside Falcone and Hill, is enough to make anyone go to extremes. And that actually ties really well into something that we see in our own reality, as the desire for power and wealth often takes a toll on innocent lives, with children often being forced to grow up without parents or in awful conditions due to the actions of a handful of people in power. This could mean anything from poverty caused by high prices and no employment opportunities to wars destroying entire cities, leaving people struggling to survive. The children who grow up in these conditions grow up with a grudge, wanting to get back at the people who took away their childhood and made their lives hell. And the cycle repeats. Only when the original aggressor acknowledges their actions as wrong, with an honest move to make amends and try to fix whatever damage they can any kind of healing even start. Even then, it isn't always enough though. For the leaders of the Children of Arkham, Vicky Vale and Oswald Cobblepot, their revenge isn't about getting retribution for their own families and the families of all the other people that Thomas Wayne hurt. It's about taking down a system that allowed those atrocities to occur in the first place. Just taking down the Waynes, Falcone, and Hill isn't enough, for instance, because someone new will just crop up in their place and continue the harm. But they aren't going to be successful in the attempted uprising, and Cobblepot will be the first to fall as Bruce and Gordon are able to team up, with Bruce distracting Cobblepot while Gordon takes down the device that he was using to control the drones. And all there is to do now is track down and thwart Lady Arkham and her plan. Heading back to the Batcave to plan out his next move, Bruce gets a chance for a heart-to-heart with Alfred that brings up another good point of discussion. Alfred blames himself for everything that's happened. He thinks that he could have done something to help bring down Thomas Wayne and prevent all the pain that he wound up causing. But is that really true? At a glance, it might seem like he could have gone to the authorities, maybe turned state's evidence against Thomas, and brought the whole empire down. But in reality, that was likely a pipe dream. The corruption in Gotham went all the way to the top, and even if Alfred managed to get some hard evidence, who would he have taken it to? It seems unlikely here that there was some kind of federal intervention possible. We never hear anything about federal authorities working with the Gotham PD on any of these attacks, for instance. So we have to assume that there was no one above the mayor and police departments that were already crawling with the corruption tied to Hill, Falcone, and Wayne. And bringing things into our own world, this is one of the biggest things that allows corruption at all levels of government and companies to thrive. The idea that there is no way to win, that stepping up and calling out the wrongdoing is pointless because the people with the power and money will ultimately prevail. And that fear isn't unfounded. Put yourself in Alfred's position for just a minute. You know your employer is corrupt, is doing things that are actively harming people, but you also know that the authorities that you would report to are in on the corruption, and that anything that you do to try to make things better could mean getting yourself jailed or killed. Would you have the courage to stand up against that kind of blatant abuse of power? In the real world, we have whistleblower laws and protections for people who speak out about corruption, which helps in some situations. But those laws and people who step up aren't always enough. There's also the problem of defining the corruption and activities that can be called out, as there have been instances of people who blew the whistle only to be disregarded or gotten rid of because what they thought was corruption wasn't considered bad enough to deal with. In those cases, the actions of corporations or governments were shielded either because they weren't really a problem or because someone with enough power and influence decided that there was nothing wrong. The next step in those cases is to try and win over public opinion, releasing documents and information to media sources to hopefully get enough public outcry to fix the problem. Alfred might have been able to do that, although the outcome might have been similar to what we got with the Children of Arkham in the end, so maybe it was for the best that he just kept his head down. Getting back on track, Bruce has been reinstated as CEO of Wayne Enterprises, because apparently just showing his replacement was evil was enough to get them to forget about Thomas's actions. And he's able to find out that Cobblepot changed a lot of records while he was in charge. It seems kind of insane that he would have access to change things like Bruce's medical and education records, even as CEO, but no one ever said that Wayne Enterprises was a competent company. A little digging reveals that Vicky Vale was working for years to uncover the extent of the corruption in Gotham, with a specific focus on figuring out who was locked in Arkham for legitimate reasons and who was thrown in for going against the Cabal. The Children of Arkham also seem to have been formed as more of a political action group than an actual terrorist organization, but when no one was listening to them, they decided to escalate. Again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, with Vicky and others like her being forced to grow up without parents due to the actions of Thomas, Falcone, and Hill. And when no one stepped in to right the wrong, or at least try to, things got out of hand. When people get desperate, there's no telling how things will turn out. Before dealing with Vicky, though, Bruce is forced to meet up with Selina Kyle, who apparently stole one of Batman's prototype tools and took off. Getting the device back isn't hard, but Bruce is barely able to finish up with what will be his final conversation with Catwoman before more bad news hits. Alfred has been kidnapped. Lady Arkham isn't playing around, and this time she's gotten a little too personal. Alfred is the closest thing to a father that Bruce has, and time is of the essence as he searches the manor for clues. A note on the back of a picture frame leads to a video, presumably hosted on a private server, where Lady Arkham is threatening to kill Alfred and return him to Bruce in pieces. Clues from the video lead Bruce back to the Vale house, where he uncovers evidence that Vicky was abused by her foster parents, an all too familiar reality for many who wind up in the foster care system. This was a pretty extreme example, though, as Vicky had been left in a hole in the ground for who knows how long when she was little. And all of it was directly the fault of Thomas Wayne. That doesn't excuse some of her actions, but it's hard not to feel at least some sympathy for her and to understand her need for schadenfreude. Imagine that the richest guy in town had managed to get your parents locked up and or killed, and you wound up in an abusive foster home as a result, taking on years of torture and not understanding why it was happening to you. A lot of foster kids feel unwanted, like they did something wrong to deserve the situation they are in, and I'd be willing to bet that Vicky probably felt like that for several years, even into her adult life, until she got her answer in the form of the Wayne family. And let's just pause for a moment to appreciate the depth of this so-called villain, because there are so many bad guys out there that are just doing evil for the sake of doing evil. Vicky Vale and Oswald Cobblepot both have valid reasons for their anger, and from what we see in the Vale house, Vicky is even being a little nicer than most people probably would after going through what she did. And to top things off, it isn't like she was stuck in the system because of some freak accident, or even because her parents willingly gave her up, something that happens far too often. She was there because of a malicious act by Thomas Wayne, who didn't like that her parents crossed him in one way or another. Alfred isn't down in the hole, though, as Lady Arkham has already left with him and her goons, heading to Arkham Asylum, where she intends to release all the inmates and finish off both Bruce and Alfred. Now, there's a lot that happens at Arkham. Most of it is just a fight and chase sequence through the facility. But in the end, Batman winds up in the catacombs beneath the facility, facing Vicky Vale and trying to talk some sense into her and save Alfred. Most of it is the expected back and forth. But there is one moral question to answer, as Vicky tells you to take off your mask if you really want to save Alfred. Now, I say it's a moral question, but that really depends on a lot of things, like whether having a secret identity is really the best thing to do. Normally, secret identities are used to protect the people the hero cares about, or so that's the reason given. So it could be argued that keeping his identity a secret was his way of protecting not only himself, but also the people like Alfred and any future loved ones that he might have. That kind of goes out the window here, though, because there really isn't anyone in Bruce's life outside of Alfred, at least no one that he really cares about at the moment. That being the case, I chose to take off the mask because my biggest concern was keeping Alfred safe, and I thought all along that Bruce needed to start taking more responsibility for things and tackling them head on rather than hiding under the cowl. His interaction with Cobblepot was the perfect example of this, and even Alfred called that out as the right move. Batman has his uses, but he isn't human in most people's eyes. He's a symbol. And while looking up to a symbol can give people some hope at times, symbols are harder to connect to on a human level than other people. And that unmasking breaks Vicky in a way, as she had seen Batman as the selfless hero, even as Bruce was the selfish villain in her eyes. Seeing them as one and the same, cognitive dissonance takes over, and she has to reconcile the opposites. And this is where I'd love to say that there was the option to just talk things out, to have her realize that Bruce wasn't Thomas and that her actions as Lady Arkham weren't getting the justice that she truly deserved. But that isn't how things went, as she and Bruce have a massive fight that winds up bringing the roof of the cavern down on top of her, as both Bruce and Alfred escape just in the nick of time. There's a couple of closing scenes and a decision to go to one final press conference as either Batman or Bruce Wayne, but that's basically the end of the story. Overall, for a Telltale game, I thought that the story and characters were really well done, and there were plenty of great ethical conundrums to discuss throughout. I know there's a second game, and I'd like to check that out at some point, but for the time being, we're going to be moving on next week into the world of Cyberpunk before jumping into the Caribbean in Assassin's Creed Black Flag. To make sure you don't miss out on those and other great games that I'll be covering in the coming months, like this video and subscribe to Lost in Games on YouTube. I release new philosophy and ethics in games videos every Thursday, and I dive into other moral and ethical quandaries in Lost in Games Unscripted most other days of the week. If you want to help me pick up new games to cover while getting early access to videos and more, I've got channel memberships and a Patreon. Chipping in just a couple of dollars a month helps me keep making breakdowns and expanding into other areas. That's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.